A functional approach views child aggressive behaviors as a phenomena that is best explained by examining the environmental context, both antecedent to the behavior as well as consequent to its occurrence. In the next set of slides and narration, I will examine aggression in terms of the following two areas: how aggressive behavior is maintained as a functional, adaptive mechanism in social contexts. In other words, why does it persist? And secondly, how aggression can be initially developed early or later in childhood via environmental arrangements and contingencies. Here are the requisites or risk factors for facilitating aggressive behavior in children as a functional repertoire. Now we'll go over each one of them individually. There must be a reliable relationship between the occurrence of aggressive behavior and the desired outcome. This requires that aggressive behavior has more frequently produced the desired outcome than other behaviors. That is, it has a history of reinforcement. Let's take a hypothetical child during a shopping trip who desires a box of cookies that comes with a prize inside. You might currently say he's motivated to get the particular box of cookies. The child begins to engage in a number of non-aggressive behaviors during this circumstance, all of which turn out to be ineffective. You can see in this table the first 4 rows indicate that the behaviors that he displayed and the result in whether he got cookies or not all was no. Following that chain of transactions, an instance of aggressive tarred tug on the mom's blouse after a short delay acquires the cookies. Hence, this latter behavior was effective, that is, functional in this circumstance, and the other behaviors were not. If more forceful behaviors result in obtaining desired items on shopping trips relative to other behaviors, a reliable relationship between these two events develops. We call this a functional contingency. The existence of an establishing operation, or EO, is necessary. The text provides a sufficient delineation of an establishing operation. As you probably know, it can be either a state of deprivation or the presence of an aversive condition or stimulus. Also, and finally, the previous approximations and forms of aggression have had a history of resulting in the desired outcome under the given establishing operation, or EO. In other words, there is a history of aggression working, and it works in certain contexts. That is, people who are discriminative for reinforcement of the given form of aggressive behavior are more likely to have aggression under that condition. So aggression has to work in a given EO. So let's look at the child repertoire needed for aggression to flourish. First, the topography must be at a performance level for the social environment to produce the reinforcer. In other words, aggression needs to be at a level that will produce the desired outcome. It also depends on the victim repertoire as well. What forms and types of aggression that may be effective with one victim may be ineffective for another intended victim. Therefore, inept repertoires will either undergo extinction or become more effective over time. Next, even if one environment has effective contingencies for aggression, aggression will often generalize to other environments where contingencies are weak to non-existent, often forcing such environments to, unfortunately, reinforce aggression. Hence, having someone who is at such levels of competence in aggression may require all environments to produce disabling conditions, both the withdrawal of reinforcement as well as the advent of punishing stimuli, which will be discussed later in this talk. While the previous lecture certainly explains why or how aggression can be made adaptive in social environments, one might ponder how someone becomes aggressive in the first place. It is often contended that a person is inherently aggressive and that social and environmental factors have little to do with someone engaging in aggressive behavior. I don't believe this to be the case. While I may not deny that constitutional factors may be involved, which we really don't understand at this point and have little evidence to tie a causal link to aggression, the development of aggression can be explained very nicely by resorting to a model demonstrating selection by the social environment. A classic study carried out by Dr. Gerald Patterson and colleagues at the University of Oregon sheds some light on how aggression is acquired. His research team observed initially aggressive children in social interactions with their victims in preschools. In other words, the already aggressive children would engage in such behavior with children who were non-aggressive upon entering preschool. The non-aggressive children learned to strike back against their aggressors over the course of the school year. Further, these previously non-aggressive children also learned to initiate aggression under circumstances of desiring some item or toy that someone else had. What was also clear to the observers was that children who did not fend off the attack from the aggressive children became discriminative, that is, targets for aggression from other aggressive children. In summary, this study reveals that preschool situations can develop aggressive behavior in children who were previously non-aggressive. Why would a child learn to become aggressive under such circumstances? Patterson acknowledged that aggression is a unique operant response, in that it presents a narrow range of options for adaptive reactions to such incidents. Because of the nature of this response, it often results in the victim acceding to the demand or request behind the aggression, or learning how to counterattack. Is aggression always the likely result when such a behavior is functional, given environmental circumstances, and the perpetrator has a competent repertoire? The role of inhibitory stimuli in making aggressive behavior less likely is a big factor. It is often overlooked by many people who refuse to examine how punishment contingencies affect human behavior. For further information, see the PowerPoint presentation entitled MOs and Aggression on page 135 of the text for a complete analysis of the role of inhibitory stimuli, that is, punishment contingencies and their additional role as aversive state EOs. If you encounter anyone who doubts the role of inhibitory stimuli in reducing or eliminating aggressive behavior, give him this example. Fights in professional hockey are common and almost expected. However, I have heard from sports authorities that there is a significant decrease when the teams are in the playoffs. Is the reason for less fights involve the hockey players being less angry during the playoffs? I believe the explanation probably lies in the increased penalties for such incidents. This is in spite of the attendees of the playoffs desiring for such aggression at any rate. Implementing stiffer penalties, even when the attention and social reinforcement, that is the audience, are still available for fights, exemplifies the role of inhibitory stimuli. Let me give you a question. What do you think would happen if the players who start the fight and those who retaliate are penalized with loss of salaries for 6 months? Do you think you would see hockey fights regularly during games? Do video games that have violent content encourage and develop aggression in young children? It is often contended that playing violent video games are a major factor in childhood violence and aggression. I assume that the basis for such a contention is the studies done on observational learning by Bender and his colleagues. But such a conclusion from his research is an overreach, and here's why. While such a format, that is video games, can explain the acquisition of a given form of aggressive behavior, in other words, the child learns a particular act or acts, it cannot be responsible for the continued display of such behavior in social contexts. As you probably have deduced by now, an operant behavior, including aggression, once acquired, is a function of the contingencies that exist in a given social environment. In other words, its continued display has a lot to do with its function. Therefore, while such video games may facilitate a child's acquiring various forms of aggression, whether they occur and then persist in time is a result of two sets of contingencies. One, the function of the aggressive behavior to access a specific reinforcer, that is outcome, or escape an aversive event, and two, the potential for punishment contingencies to inhibit such behavior. So, did the video game make me do it? I think we can address that question by examining, was there a functional outcome, and was there a concurrent punishment contingency to inhibit such behavior in the context in which it was displayed?